everyone, and welcome back to our Ellipse Unsealed podcast. Today we have with us Scott and James of TestSmart. Hi guys, thanks for joining us.
Hey, nice to see you.
Yeah,
I like that name, Test Mart, but then you say it quickly, it's Test Smart, which is
I noticed that when I just said it.
Purposeful, but good job marketing. I love it.
thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Somewhat unintended, but that's the way that it worked out.
We'll go with that. Yeah. So we've been doing a podcast. We love what we're doing out here. A lot of focus on D365 and other things, but been a lot going on in the testing world, and so we wanted to jump on that and maybe you could just tell us a little bit why testing. Well, first introduce yourselves and your company, but then we'll talk a little bit about why testing has become such a hot topic here in 23.
Yeah. So my name's James. I was one of the founders of the TestSmart. We founded the company back in 2020. I was actually just moving back to New Zealand because of COVID. And you may or may not know this, but during COVID times in New Zealand, everyone got locked down. So I was stuck in this little apartment with pretty much just the TV and my wife. And there's only so many reruns you can watch on Netflix. And she was like, "Do you want to watch Love is Blind again?" And I was like, "Not really." So a friend messaged me and he was like, "There's this company in New Zealand. They've just gone live with the software D365 Finance and Operations. But their staff has moved on, and the SI that they were working with is no longer sort of like with them. Can you help do some testing?" And I was like, "Sure." So they had essentially been forced to upgrade after an implementation, and they had no one available to really do that testing. So we literally started it like that. We suddenly became like consultants on finance and operations testing, built out some tests. And then what we saw in the market is that we were building roughly the same tests with some customizations and some configurations, and then we were upgrading those over time. So we thought maybe there's a solution that we can bring to like SaaS, the cloud, that then more people can take advantage of. And so that's the reason why we founded the TestSmart. Then we moved into the States in really late 2022 and started to gain some traction there, and then thought we should probably try to make a big splash and sort of hired Scott to get that going.
Awesome. Scott Bodenheimer. Yeah, I've been in the dynamic space for 20 plus years. I'm a recovering accountant. You can maybe see that behind my head. But most of that time was spent helping clients select and implement Dynamics, working from a system integrator standpoint. And testing, wasn't a big deal until we got to the cloud. But yeah, most of my career has been working with customers, D365, short time at Microsoft, but I've worked for various system integrators and made a lot of connections in the market.
Yeah, and I come from an end user. I was 20 years at an apparel company in Colorado. And in my role, I was tech support, but then quickly I was a developer. So I developed an X++ and Dynamics AX version 09 and 12, and then moved into this, what I'm doing now. But while I was there and I was then IT director doing projects, testing was always the heaviest load. Like, getting people to do the UAT, the user acceptance testing, was the toughest part. I had to start scheduling time and just making people do it because it's just something nobody wants to. They want the new functionality, but they don't really want to test it. They just want you to put it into production and then deal with it after the fact. So why now with Dynamics is testing become such a hot topic?
I think
is it just all coming to a head?
What's that?
Is it just all kind of coming to a head? Is it just what created this?
I think
the firestorm.
There's a huge wave of customers that are moving to Dynamics 365 finally on the finance side. A lot of pent up Dynamics AX customers that looked at it, considered it, but hadn't made the move. So we're at the beginning of the wave of that large mass exodus out of AX and onto Dynamics 365. And after they've been on Dynamics 365, they realize the amount of testing they need to do goes up 3 to 5x. So they're not doing an update every 3 to 5 years. They're doing one every 3 to 6 months. So that they have to do a whole lot more testing. And it's onerous. You mentioned that. It's hard to get people scheduled. They don't want to do it. It takes time away from their day job. So there's just a whole bunch of people looking for solutions. Microsoft's got a solution called RSAT. It's pretty limited. And they released a list of other alternatives this fall. which has really driven a lot of demand our way. We're at the top of that list. A couple of our competitors obviously were on that too, but it's really opened everyone's eyes up to the fact that there are options out there for automated testing, and gotten people off the dime and starting to look around a little bit.
I think that's key, right? I mean, Microsoft recognized that they're pushing these updates that are happening, 3, 4, 5 times a year. On average, probably 2 to 3 for each organization, and that if they don't have a product that's going to support getting these updates in place, which are kind of the most important thing, that why not uplift companies that are doing it a little better than Microsoft is to get people on board? So what does Testmart do that's kind of uplifting or amplifying what RSAT doesn't?
Yeah, so I'm happy to jump into that. When you're looking at RSAT, you're looking at a tool that really only will test finance and operations. It's not going to test any of the other integrations that you sort of need to as part of your testing. If you look at where tests are likely to fail, it's around those integrations, it's around those optimizations and those ISVs. So what we try to do is we try to make it seamless for your team. We know that I've been in testing for a long time now. We know that your team doesn't want to do testing. You have a weirdo to want to do that. I always liked hunting for those bugs.
They're out there.
Yeah, it made things, it was sort of like solving a puzzle for me. It was really interesting trying to work out where there would be an issue. But I realized that, that's not for everyone, and most people are super busy at the moment. So we essentially try to make it so that we've got this library of tests that you can take, you can choose the ones that you want, and then we'll help you configure them to your system. So it's far less disruption on your team, and then we keep those up to date. So you don't need to worry about them breaking, which was happening fairly regularly for us. That if Microsoft changed something, we're changing it in advance. So when you're ready to test that next version, we've already fixed it so that it's ready for you to verify.
Yeah. And for somebody that's already invested in RSAT, how does your tool handle that? Like, I've already built maybe a library of tests.
Yep. So we have seen that. There's actually, I'm not so sure the percentages, but like a number of companies will come to us. They will have started on RSAT and they'll be like, this is a great idea. I wish I could automate them. And then they use RSAT for a bit and they're like, this was a good idea, but this is much harder than we thought, or maybe it's more regular maintenance. And so we've actually got like a conversion tool. So if you've got a set of RSAT tests, we can just convert them and then they work within our system and then they live there rather than on RSAT.
And what about, you mentioned customization, so that includes ISVs. What about like things that I've customized, like extended code or extended functionality, that also can be incorporated into the testing as well?
Yeah, exactly. And we want to focus on those areas when we start doing that onboarding with you and your team, right? Because we want to make sure that we understand that, we know how it works, and then that we test every scenario that's going to be relevant to that that customization that you've made. And it's not very difficult for you to take one of our base tests, which comes from our library, and then configure it for new fields or a slightly different flow. That's really easy for us to do.
Yeah.
So you said, you're kind of like a weirdo or what, since you love testing. I mean, do you notice like any other areas in your life where you utilize testing, just some random, not as technical things?
Well, I've always liked puzzles and I've always liked data. So like a testing example that maybe makes sense for this context is, my family's from UK and there are no good shortbread cookies in New Zealand. So again, during like COVID times, I pretty much bought the supermarket out of butter because there wasn't that much butter at the time. Bought them out of flour. Yep. And then I think I made I actually have a spreadsheet, 142 batches of shortbread cookies, trying different ratios, different cooking techniques, all with like scores for how easy they were to make and then how well they tasted on 4 different factors. So it's like, what was the crunch like? What was the taste like? So yeah, I guess that's always just been the way that I've been. It's the big data stuff's really interesting.
Scott, do you have a spreadsheet like that? I just love, and by the way, James, I have a spreadsheet for everything. Like I do Oscar movies every year. I watch holiday. So I have a spreadsheet to track all this stuff. It's like, what did I like about this movie? Did I watch it? Are we not going to watch it? Tracking is a key, man. I love it.
Yeah. No,
Scott, you have a spreadsheet like that?
Oh, I've got tons of spreadsheets as a recovering accountant. Yeah, I was working on one this morning, golf courses I want to play in Palm Springs.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Cool. I like that James had that immediately at hand. I got a spreadsheet right here, 142 versions of this.
Yeah.
Like you said, cookies are my favorite thing to test. I mean, outside of D365, cookies, as you're making them, testing them, and butter is my number one go-to snack outside of cookies, by the way.
That's awesome.
What about, you mentioned, just going back to testing in general, Microsoft, they've brought attention to this. Are they supporting these products? Is it supporting you in any way with, you said, early access to environments? Like, how is Microsoft supporting the testing environments and making sure people are staying up to date?
Yeah, Microsoft has been great in terms of like giving us early access and then helping us initially get set up in this area. So very appreciative of what they've done. And then obviously like putting us on that list of recommended tools has been a great boon for us.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of it is just the fact that we get access to the versions early so that we can make those changes so that if anyone is upgrading, we're ahead of them. So they don't need to worry about the test breaking in that way.
How easy is it for a customer to get started with a testing tool? I mean, you mentioned, you're able to do the customizations, do some conversions, but what's a ramp up period look like? Like if I'm just looking at, a customer, I'm getting ready to think about doing my next update and I want to bring a testing suite in. What can I expect from an onboarding or ramp up period?
Yeah, so unfortunately, it's like different for everyone. It's going to depend on what customizations they have, what other integrations they potentially have, but we can get them going with a small set of tests that cover like the core functionality really quickly. We can do that in under a day if we get access to the environment,
Okay.
and then we can work with them over a longer period of time, let's say 2 weeks to a month, to get any of those customizations done. But as you can imagine, with FinOps finance and operations implementations,
yeah,
some are huge, some are small, so it's hard to give like a perfect answer. It's going to depend on the company size, the customizations, the integrations, all that type of stuff.
Well,
so
to the extent that they want to test as well, right? So with manual testing, they end up doing a small set of tests because they have limited amount of time to test it. So they'll test the high priority stuff. When they automate tests with a solution like the TestMart, they can catch those fringe cases that they may not touch because they don't have time. So the completeness of that testing solution broadens out over time is what we're finding.
Yep. But it's so important. I mean, again, coming from a background where I was in the ecosystem, not just, people were, the problem is not just testing new functionality. It's that the regression test, you have to test everything that worked before, for the most part, to make sure it all still works again. And so there's a lot that goes around this. You got, and for me, I did have to mitigate. It's like, well, I can't test everything. We just don't have the resources. And so I've got to selectively pick what do I think it might break, based on the functionality and what I know about the code I wrote. That's what I'm going to focus my tests on. There was not RSAT for me. It was all manual, like you said. It was pretty much, or there might have been a tool that just wasn't accessible to me at the time. So it was really all manual testing, having somebody, and a lot of times I would need a functional person too. I could lean functional if need be, but I'm an IT resource, a programmer, and a tech support person. So I just didn't know quite the functionality for testing as some of the other subject matter experts might. So getting that in place is and having this kind of testing suite is so interesting to me coming from that coming from that seat. I wish I had something like that going forward.
One is that if they're consuming the Microsoft updates, they don't have a choice. They've got to take that update at a certain point. So there's a hard deadline for them to get that done. And we had a customer that ran out of time prior to coming to the TestMart, and they got forced into an update, and it really messed up their systems. They couldn't take orders for a couple of days. They couldn't ship stuff. So when you're doing your own build, you've got time and you can push that maybe to the next sprint. But when you're consuming a code update for Microsoft, you don't have that choice.
That's a good point. I mean, and having gone to, everybody knows about Summit and the different conventions and conferences. Any session around continuous updates or these was, derailed in a second from folks in the room talking about how hard it was for them to take these updates and keep up to date on the testing part of it. It's like I got to hire 2 people to do testing every time we do an update, or we take 2 weeks off of our normal, like you said, day-to-day business because I've got to put all this time and focus on testing because I'm forced to do this update. Right. And we understand why. I mean, Microsoft is trying to keep this one platform together, and that makes total sense to me. But it does create some challenges, and it's nice that a software like TestSmart has come along to help make it easier.
One is as we mature as an organization, we're getting out and talking to the ISVs as well. So almost every one of those customers has got at least 1, maybe 5 ISV products installed. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to get to them to help them with testing because they have the same challenge. They have to manage the Microsoft kind of platform update, and then all of their code they're building on top of that, and they can't skip a version like a customer can. So
exactly, yeah,
they got to build for every version. They got to maintain those versions. They have to understand what changes Microsoft made, what changes they made to their code, and keep everything in sync.
Yeah, and I've told this story from an ISV standpoint. When I was at end user, we had the ISV product break on a Windows update. It wasn't even a Dynamics update. Windows 10 updated. One of the versions of Windows 10 broke the product, and they didn't know. They just hadn't tested it in that version of Windows 10 and a certain, with certain, things in place, and all of a sudden it wasn't working for us. And it took them a couple of weeks to figure out it was Windows 10 that was the problem. So yes, it's not just the Dynamics portion. It could be anywhere that the ISVs have to stay on top of this, and it's good that you're working with them. That you don't have any concern about your product working with ISVs though. It's not like you have to reach out to every ISV and worry about that. It's just you're trying to help them along to be more readily available for the continuous updates.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're all built using the same. If they are installed on top, they're all built using the same technology. So our tool can sort of automatically handle them because of that.
Yep.
Well, I was just going to say, if you don't mind, Bobby, one of the byproducts of what we do is provide process documentation. So one of our ISV customers is using the test results that they run as part of their solution that they give to their customers. So they've got some automated, updated process documentation every time they run those tests.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge problem with customers as well. Every customer is really great at documenting their business processes, right? Every single time. So every time we run this, they're going to get a new set of videos, Word documents, and so on to help them with that process documentation to make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing and to help onboard new employees.
Yeah. And the product's completely cloud-based, right? It's not. There's nothing,
Yes.
On-prem or just
Yep. In my previous life, I've had to fight for servers and try to get as much capacity as possible. So we like, let's put this in the cloud. Let's make sure everyone's got the capacity they need. Makes it far easier for people to install and get up and running.
Awesome.
What's the storage like? I mean, are the tests like? What's the footprint for a test suite? Is it large? Depending on, obviously it depends on the company and how many tests they have. But
So the tests themselves are obviously like reasonably small in terms of like our storage, but mostly what we're doing is because on every single run we're creating documentation, videos, walkthrough guides, all of that type of thing. That's what ends up like being a space constraint for us. So we let you keep, you can essentially save tests or save test results, which then keep them in a library forever. And we recommend that you do that once per version, but then we do clean up any like extra runs that happen outside of those. So let's say,
is there a certain point where it just goes away altogether? Like after a certain number of versions, it just swipe.
So at the moment we're keeping back like 8 versions, which should be enough for anyone. We're not expecting anyone to want to keep them longer than that.
Right. But I really like the version, 8 versions ago. I want to go back.
Right. Not so sure.
It happens.
Doing that.
Scott's an accountant. They want to keep everything. Our accountants wanted data, back to 1972. So we had our first challenge when it came to data retention.
Yeah, and you can export them obviously if you want. I was
going to ask. I assumed you could export them if you wanted to export them and share them with team members, or keep them in your own library if you wanted to. Hey, this one's even though it's older, it's a really good version of how we do this, and we'd love to keep this particular documentation.
There's no problem with you doing that as much as you want. And we do actually highlight the areas that have changed as well. So,
that's a good point.
Yeah, one of the pain points that we've seen is like Microsoft is releasing these updates and it's great, new functionality coming in, but like, how do you teach the team about all of that? How can you? So we highlight where things are changing so that people don't get a surprise, or so that they can take advantage of those new pieces of functionality.
Cool. How's that presented? Is that a dashboard when you log in? Is it so they log in as like, here's the kind of the list, or here's a jumping off point on how to see what's new?
Yeah, so we actually, that's currently like a report, so it can be sent around for the entire team with links to the specific tests, which areas have changed, and which like we call them components, right? So it might be your login component has changed, or your sales order creation. So, and which of those components have changed with essentially like version to version comparison, right? So here's your version 1, here's your version 2, and then highlighting the areas that are different.
Gotcha.
Nice. So kind of as we're wrapping up this episode and, wrapping up 2023 as well, what does the testing world look like looking into 2024? I know there's some changes within continuous updates in Microsoft, and does that affect you guys at all, or what does that kind of look like?
I can start and let James finish because he's the brains of the operation. I mean, so Microsoft has changed their update policy for next year, but essentially customers still have to take at least 2 updates throughout the course of the year. So even though they've reduced the number they're going to issue, the impact on the customers is pretty much the same. They just have less options to pick from.
Right.
James did a good job in building AI into our product, and we continue to automate more and more as we go forward. There's still some things that we're doing that could be a little more automated, but we just continue to build that stuff out, make it easier to onboard customers, update those tests, and so on. I'll let James explain a little bit about the AI componentry and what he's got planned.
Yeah, so we're obviously, like, being a testing company, I think we've got to be pretty strict on releasing something that's not going to break. So we make sure that we test everything beforehand. But we're working on some interesting things linked to the ChatGPTs, OpenAI of the world, that will make creating tests even easier than what it currently is. Essentially, like being able to go into your data, look at what data you have to work out which customizations you're going to have, and highlight those to your team, and then make the test building around those even easier. So at the moment, we do have a team that helps you onboard. That's going to be automated in the future to make it even easier for you to get up and running within days fully, rather than it potentially being weeks if you've got a large number of customizations.
Yeah.
So it's sort of all full steam ahead on that side.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, we're just talking about AI. It's good to see, just continue to see, real world, exciting uses of how it's incorporating into everyday software. Like I said, this natural language to be able to just, describe what you want to do in a test, as opposed to having to know something technical, makes it so much more accessible for folks across your organization. It's good to hear you're incorporating it in.
Yeah, very much so. Like I've been in the testing world for like 15, 16 years now. So I've seen a lot of these tools where they're difficult for potentially people to pick up, where it's not their day job, right? Like they don't know how the DOM works. They don't know how the underlying code works. So we're trying to make our tool as easy to use and disruption free as possible. And so we're using AI to sort of get past some of those hurdles that, some of those challenges that you currently have.
Well, and that allows us to bring the price down to a point too where they're getting a fast ROI. I mean, if you talk to one customer that was hiring a small army of testers, our solution costs less than half of the price of hiring consultants for one update. So it's affordable, and the AI allows us to be a lot more automated and bring that price down to where it can get a really quick ROI for customers.
Yep. And just folks watching will know, we'll have links to your product when we drop this episode on LinkedIn. We'll make sure that we James and Scott are tagged so you can get in touch with them on LinkedIn, and we'll have the website listed as well. Anything else before we sign off? Any last words about testing? Or we're expecting the recipe link to your number one shortbread cookie as well, James, leading into the holidays. You've opened us up. So.
And the whole spreadsheet.
Yeah, I have it here. So the top rate, like the number of different things that I went through in terms of whether you should use icing sugar or normal sugar or brown sugar or a combination, or do you crumble the butter, it went in depth. But I thought it was a fun project. I've got to be honest.
That's an awesome project.
Yeah.
And do you have a favorite shortbread cookie? Like, I love it's kind of blasé, but I love Scott Walker's shortbread cookies are one of my favorites.
So I think it's the one at like Sainsbury's, and they cost like honestly like 50p. In UK, and they're super good for what you can get from like the supermarket, but you can't get them in New Zealand. I don't think you can get them in the US. I did look at trying to order some, but I think the shipping cost to me in New Zealand was going to be like $50 or $60 for a single like 50 pence pack. So not a good ROI on the shipping.
No, not worth it.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Cool. Scott, James, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us today. It's been a great episode. And for all those listening, thanks for watching again. And until next time. So see you guys.
Take care,
everyone.
See ya.